Hey guys, this is Chris from Rekkid Talk doing another Ranking the Albums. Today I'm tackling the discography of R.E.M. and in particular their 15 studio albums starting in 1983 and going through 2011. And so this is probably the second artist with a large, more than 10 album discography I tackled. My very first video was on Juliana Hatfield with it was 18 studio albums at the time. She's had a new one since I made that video up to 19. I just ranked the top 10. I am going to rank all 15 of them here. I did find that REM kind of sort of petered out at the end of their career, which is probably more common with bands with very large discographies over decades, where Juliana is somebody who in her 50s is still making some of her best albums, and probably my least favorite were in the middle of her career. So I'm going to kind of go through them five at a time. And so the last five albums, sort of the ones after Bill Berry left the band, were albums I've honestly not listened to all that much. They're generally not the albums people talk much about when they're talking about REM. I did go back and re-listen to all of them to see if any of them would crack my top 10. And one of them almost did, but it turns out that the last five albums are going to be my numbers 11 through 15. So let's start with number 15, REM, Around the Sun, 2004. This album sucks. I mean, this is terrible. And pretty much the critics didn't like it. I think it completely sucks. It's easy listening. Michael Stipe, like basically all the worst tendencies of Michael Stipe, and none of his best tendencies. There's no interesting Peter Buck guitar and mandolin work. No interesting Mike Mills. This is just it's terrible. I should stop talking about it, but guitarist Peter Buck said that for him around the Sun just wasn't really listenable because it sounds like what it is, a bunch of people that are so bored with the material that they can't stand it anymore. All right, that's by far the worst. I listened to it to make this video. I hope to never listen to it again. Number 14 is going to be Reveal from 2001. This is kind of a boring album as well. There are a couple of cool songs. Imitation of Life, I think, is a pretty good song from this particular album. I read somewhere that Michael Stipe considers this his favorite album. While I agree with Peter Buck in not liking Around the Sun, I'm not really going to agree with Michael Stipe in that that is their best album. Unlucky number 13, REM Up from 1998. So this is the first of the post-Bill Berry era albums. There's a few cool songs, Lotus in particular, but it just is something that kind of sits on my shelf. My number 12, Collapse Into Now, the very last REM album. Discover is a good opener. There is some good variety on here. It's definitely a step up from the last couple of albums. I'm really, maybe they should have quit in the 90s, but I'm really glad that Around the Sun wasn't their final album. And then their penultimate album, Accelerate, from 2008, is my number 11. It was the one of the final five albums that I considered putting in the top 10, although as you see, I ended up not doing it. This definitely rocks the most of any of the later career REM albums. And so I'm going to come back with my next five here shortly. All right, so now we're going to do the second five REM albums. So we're going to go numbers 10 through number 6. So my number 10 is going to be Monster from 1994. This is the one I actually kind of thought about flipping Accelerate into the number 10 slot and dropping this to number 11, because I get lost in sort of the middle of this album, but there's enough. What's the Frequency, Kenneth, Crush with Eyeliner, Bang and Blame. There's enough. I think the strongest songs on Monster are enough to keep it ahead of Accelerate, but certainly not in the upper echelon of REM albums in my mind. My number 9 is going to be Green from 1988. And so I know they're starting to get more popular at this point of time. Let me remind myself of these songs on here. Pop Song 69, Orange Crush, Get Up, Stand. REM tends to be a band that I don't like some of their singles. Stand is one of my least favorite REM songs, which is on the Green album. And it wasn't it's okay, but there wasn't a ton of stuff to keep me going. My number 8 is going to be 1991's Out of Time. And Out of Time is kind of funny in the sense that it features Shiny Happy People, my least favorite REM song of all time, with Kate Pearson on backing vocals. The last song on the album, Me and Honey, which also has Kate Pearson on vocals, is one of my favorite REM deep cuts of all time. I like Radio Song. I don't really like Losing My Religion. Again, sort of that. I tend to like deep cuts more than singles with REM. Texarkana, Country Feedback are some good singles. My number 7 is going to be Document from 1987. I think these final 7 are all going to be just outstanding albums. Finest Work Song, Exhuming McCarthy, Oddfellows Local 151. Again, I'm not that crazy about It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I feel fine. But Document's a very good album. My number 6 is going to be 1992 Automatic for the People. And so we've got The Sidewinder Sleeps Tonight, Ignoreland, Men on the Moon, Night Swimming, some really cool songs. Not really that crazy about Everybody Hurts, but this is a pretty good album. And I'll be back with the top 5 in just a moment. All right, so let's talk about my top 5 REM albums. My number 5 is Reckoning, 1984. This is the second album. 7 Chinese Brothers, South Central Rain, Pretty Persuasion, Don't Go Back to Rockville. If this is number 5 in your discography, it means you were a pretty fucking good band. My number 4 is going to be Fables from the Reconstruction, 1985. This is the third album. You've noticed that my top 5, with one exception, is basically their first few albums from the 80s. Feeling Gravity's Pull, Driver 8, Old Man Kinsey, Auctioneer, Wendell G. Fables of the Reconstruction. Really, really solid album. My number 3 is, I'm going to go into the 90s. This will be the last song before Bill Berry left the band. I think this is just one of the best albums of the 1990s, not just by REM, but by anybody. New Adventures in Hi-Fi. How the West Was Won and Where It Got Us. Wake Up Bomb. Ebo the Letter. Bittersweet Me. If they had put the band to rest after this album, they would have really gone out on a high, in my viewpoint, especially with the next few albums that came out. Basically, the 3 albums that came out after New Adventures in Hi-Fi were, in my mind, the weakest 3 of their career. my number 2 REM album, R.E.M. Murmur. So this is the debut. I know there was the EP, Chronic Town. Yeah, of course, Radio Free Europe, Moral Kiosk, Shaking Through, Sneaking Through. It's Michael Stipe lyrics in the 1980s. It can be whatever you want them to be. But Murmur, 1983. And so my favorite REM album, for their 4th album of their career, 1986, Life's Rich Pageant. Begin to Begin is probably my favorite REM song of all time. First song on the album. Swan Hummingbird, Cuyahoga, I Believe. I just never get tired of this album. This is the masterpiece of a band that had, in my mind, 7 really top caliber albums and probably 11 or 12 that are at least pretty good. So there's my ranking the albums of REM. So again, to recap from 15 to 1, number 15, Around the Sun, 2004. Number 14, Reveal, 2001. Number 13, Up from 1998. Number 12, Collapse into Now, the final album from 2011. Number 11, Accelerate from 2008. Number 10, Monster, 1994. Number 9, Green, 1988. Number 8, Out of Time, 1991. Number 7, Document, 1987. Number 6, Automatic for the People, 1992. Number 5, Reckoning from 1984. Number 4, Fables of the Reconstruction, 1985. Number 3, New Adventures in Hi-Fi, 1996. Number 2, the debut Murmur, 1983. And Chris from Rekkid Talk, his favorite REM album, 1986, Life's Rich Pageant. Remember checking out the LP from the local library. And it's still great.